Hi, I'm Nelani Nettrour, and I'm going to read to you from my book, Cow's Milk. It is illustrated by Heather Nettrour, and I'm getting a little help from my husband, Barry, who's reading for Joseph McJones, and our friend Brian, who's reading for Arthur McSmith. It's dedicated to all those who ask questions, who never stop wondering or imagining. Author's note. The inspiration for Cow's Milk came around the kitchen table years ago when our children were younger. It went something like this. I was introducing a new dish to our regular dinner fare. The kids looked at me appalled. "Who wants to try that?" Josh said in disgust. "Well," I said, stalling for time while I tried to think up an answer to that comment, "someone had to be the first to try the unusual, otherwise our diet would be pretty bland." They looked at me, not quite sure what to think, but said nothing. I looked at the table for something familiar to use as an example. Take milk, for instance. What do you suppose the first kids to drink cow's milk thought when they found out where it came from? My kids looked at each other, wrinkled their noses as they looked at their glasses of milk in a new light. "That would be strange," Jasmine finally said, still looking at her milk like she wasn't sure she'd ever drink it again. "Exactly," I replied. I looked around the table at the expressions on my children's faces as they stared at their glasses of milk. I ran to get my notebook and pen. I had an idea, and cow's milk was born. It may be hard to believe, but there was a time when people didn't drink cow's milk. The only thing that drank cow's milk was the calf. It was quite by accident that cow's milk for human consumption was discovered. It all started long ago in a country village. Outside of the town, on a country road, lay the farm of Joseph McJones. It was the usual farm. He had his horse team for work. He had pigs, sheep, dogs, chickens, and a large garden. He also had his cows, and that is how this story came to be written. Joseph McJones, or Old Joe as his neighbors called him, was doing his daily chores. He had fed the chickens and the other animals. He was on his way to take care of the cows. While one cow was munching away on her breakfast, her calf contentedly drank her mother's milk. But a loud noise startled the calf, and she released from her mother suddenly. The milk in the stream hit Old Joe directly in the mouth. Before he realized what had happened, he had tasted the creamy liquid, and it didn't taste half bad. Actually, it tasted pretty good. Now up to this point, Old Joe's beverages had consisted of water, with a little apple cider mixed in now and then, when he happened to have it, which wasn't very often. This new taste intrigued him. He found a bucket, washed it up, and proceeded to milk the cow. It took him quite a few tries before he mastered the art, and even then Betsy wasn't sure what was going on. Her master had never treated her so before. Old Joe didn't get much milk on his first attempt, but it was enough for his experiment, and he knew that there was more where it came from. He brought the milk into the house where his wife was busily preparing breakfast. He poured it into a shaker and began to shake it up. His reason for doing this was to trick his wife into drinking it before she knew what it was.
"What are you making, Joseph?"
his wife asked him.
"A special treat for you, my dear,"
Old Joe answered. Now, his wife was already getting a little suspicious, because whenever he called her "my dear," she could expect almost anything. When Old Joe felt enough time had elapsed, he poured the white substance into a glass. His wife eyed it skeptically.
"Now, Bertha, why do you look so doubtful? It is really good."
With that, Old Joe took a large drink. He wiped his mouth with a smile. Bertha picked up the glass and took a small sip. To her amazement, the drink really was good. She finished the glass and set it down.
That was delicious. What was it?
Bertha asked.
Cow's milk.
Her husband answered simply,
Cow's milk? Oh, no!
was her reply as she ran from the room, hand to her mouth.
Now whatever is her problem?
Said old Joe to no one in particular.
She said that she liked it.
His wife came back soon and apologized for her behavior.
It really is quite good, if you didn't have to know what it was.
I want to see what our children and friends think of it,
said old Joe.
Now, Joseph, don't get yourself into trouble,
Bertha replied.
I know what I'm doing.
Old Joe said, and he did. The next morning, old Joe introduced the mystery fluid to his children. He had done a better job of milking and had more milk to show for his efforts. The children, who didn't have much variety in their lives, gulped it down with glee. They looked up at their father, eyes glistening, with the first milk mustaches to be had.
That was great,
said their oldest daughter, Sophie.
What was it?
All the children looked expectantly to their father, who replied with barely a pause.
Cow's milk.
A kind of wail rose from the group around the table, as in unison they screamed,
Cow's milk? Oh, no!
The children dashed from the room, hands over their mouths. After they collected themselves, they came back to their father and apologized for their rude behavior. He hugged them each in turn for being such good sports, and swore them to secrecy as to the identity of the white liquid. Then old Joe decided to try it out on his best friend, Arthur McSmith. He invited Arthur over to dinner, and afterwards gave him a glass of cow's milk. Arthur enjoyed the milk, not knowing what it was. After he drank the milk and commented on how he liked it, old Joe told him what it was.
Cow's milk? Oh, no!
Arthur said as he ran from the room, hand over his mouth.
Now, whatever got into him?
Old Joe said with a sly smile on his face. Later, after Arthur recovered himself, he apologized for his rude behavior.
But why play such a trick on me?
He asked.
I just wanted to find out if you liked my new discovery.
Well, I have to admit, it was quite tasty, as long as I didn't know what it was.
Arthur replied.
That's just about how my wife felt,
said old Joe, who now wanted to be called Joseph, or Mr. McJones, because he had a plan brewing.
I would like to open a small stand in town where others can sample this wonderful discovery. I want to introduce the world to cow's milk, but I have to do it without letting them know what they are drinking. I already know what kind of response I get when they do know. What do you think? Do you want to go in on it with me?
Joseph asked his friend hopefully.
You must keep my secret either way,
he added.
I think it would be a great idea. I'm sure we'll get a lot of business. But what do you intend to call it?
Arthur asked.
I'm thinking of calling it Moo Juice Special,
said Joseph.
Moo Juice Special.
Arthur rolled the name around his lips a few times.
Yes, I like the sound of that. Moo Juice Special it is.
Then they shook hands on it and proceeded to make plans for the building of the stand. They worked hard on their stand, fitting in the building of it between their farm chores. Curious neighbors came by before it was even completed, to see what they were up to. They kept quiet while the work was being done, merely saying, "You'll see," to the multitude of questions. Once the stand was up and the newly painted sign announced Moo Juice Special, the neighbors started flocking over. Only a few came at first, more curious than anything else, But as each tried the wonderfully creamy liquid, the word quickly spread that McJones and McSmith were really onto something, whatever that something was. Soon everyone in their small community had tried it, and returned often for more and more of it. It wasn't long before a long line of customers, not only from their town, but surrounding towns, stood waiting for another drink of it. It was unlike anything they had ever tasted. Joseph had found that if it was cooled in their stream, the flavor was enhanced even more, and it stayed fresher longer. His satisfied customers agreed. Joseph McJones and Arthur McSmith decided that it was time to expand, so they started building a new enclosed building to house their guests. The older children took over running the stand, while the fathers worked busily on completing the building. It was to house a kitchen with a large dining area filled with tables and chairs. They spent most of the spring and summer on it and the furnishings. By autumn they were ready to open. Of course, their farm had also grown, as the original cows did not produce enough to keep up with the demand. The middle children of both families had taken over the milking of the cows. Still, throughout it all, the community was none the wiser as to the secret of Moo Juice Special. Many speculated on what it could be, never guessing what it actually was. During the building project, Bertha McJones had been experimenting on her own. She had begun to remove the creamier mixture that kept floating to the top, because it was easier to serve that way. She had gathered the cream from quite a bit of the milk, and was haphazardly shaking it while she was talking with Arthur's wife, Martha, not really doing it for any purpose, just to mix the cream together with the other cream. Then something amazing happened. The cream separated into lumps and liquid that looked somewhat promising to her experienced eye. She dumped the lumps onto a plate and squeezed the rest of the liquid from it. She found a substance that spread wonderfully on her fresh-baked bread. She had discovered butter, and it was a wonder of its own. Soon butter was taking the place of lard in her baking, and the treats she came up with had no rival. Her husband agreed that her baking should accompany the Moo Juice Special at their new shop. It was on a beautiful autumn day that they opened their doors. Word had spread even farther, and the shop was filled with customers. They all wanted to sample more of the Moo Juice Special and partake of the treats offered. They were an instant success, and week by week their fame grew. People came, traveling great distances to savor the rich flavor of Moo Juice Special. The baked goods were the perfect complement for the creamy liquid. Many new acquaintances became friends as the years passed. One day, Joseph and Arthur decided that the time had come to share the secret of Moo Juice Special with their customers. They had been prodding Joseph and his family for so long, and Arthur wasn't faring any better. Both were tired of containing their secret. The room was hushed in anticipation on the day old Joe chose to announce his secret. Yes, despite all of his success, he was still known and loved best as Old Joe. When he finally did, a chorus of voices rose in the room as if one great voice.
Cow's milk!